You want to do the pledge?
We're going to start with the pledge. Senator Ricciardi is going to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to start with SB 143, the Honorable Senator Whitley. Good to see you, Senator.
Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Becky Whitley, and I represent Senate District 15, which includes the communities of Concord, Hopkinton, and Bow. So I'm here on behalf of my colleague, Senator Deborah Altschuler, who wasn't able to introduce this bill today. So I'm honored to bring forth Senate Bill 143. So just sort of really simply, this bill establishes a scholarship fund in New Hampshire's existing capital access program. And the scholarship fund is to help cover the entry costs for, quote, socially and economically disadvantaged individual and small business owners who are applying from loans from the program. So that term, I put that in quotes, that term is defined in federal law, and you can find that federal site at 15 USC 637, and we can go over what that means. So that term, socially and economically disadvantaged, is defined in federal law, and it's already used by the Small Business Association, the U.S. Small Business Association. So it's a term that I didn't come up with, Senator Altschuler didn't come up with. It's a term that already exists. And the idea is the Small Business Administration likes to support those small businesses that are typically have been at a historic economic and social disadvantage. Those are our businesses owned by communities of color, by women. So that's what we're trying to do here. So the reason why this bill came to fruition is that we know from several studies that there is a lack of access to capital in New Hampshire. This is what businesses need to get off the ground. And it's a problem for our small businesses, right? These are our friends and neighbors, our mom and pop shops that are just looking to get off the ground. And that initial access to capital to get off the ground is really lacking in New Hampshire. And so, we know that our small businesses are really the backbone of our economy in New Hampshire. And, what we, such a backbone of our economy, and is going to be what's going to propel us into the future economically. So I wanted to highlight a study recently from CNBC that showed that New Hampshire had dropped, unfortunately, 12 spots in its top states for business to number 37 this year. And when you look about why the state has dropped in these in this ranking of the top states to do business, what was really noteworthy is that New Hampshire received an F, a failing grade when it came to access to capital. And the way that they came up with this is based on the use of federal COVID money, loans to small businesses, venture capital investments. And New Hampshire was 47 out of 50 states when it came to access to capital. The other thing that this study highlighted was New Hampshire's high cost of living, which we all know our constituents are feeling really greatly, our aging workforce and other barriers. So the study really judged the workforce by the state's success in attracting college-educated workers and diversity, right? This is one of the reasons why businesses are not coming to New Hampshire. So I wanted to describe a little bit about the existing capital access program to which we're putting into this scholarship fund. So the capital access program was established by RSA 162A12, and it's an existing program within the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority. So this program already provides financing to small businesses across the state and provides 100% guarantee on term loans and lines of credit up to $200,000. So again, these are our very, very small businesses that we're supporting here. And these are for businesses with annual revenues of less than $5 million. So what this scholarship does, what we're creating in 143, covers both the borrower fee and the bank fee in this loan process. So final determination of eligibility will be at the discretion of the Business Finance Authority, depending on what funds they actually have for the program. The other thing I think it's important to know about our small businesses, which you all know, is that they're really important for driving innovation in our state. And of course, they were hit the hardest by the pandemic, and they're still sort of struggling to get out. They continue to experience. I know that a lot of the small businesses on our Concord Main Street continue to have trouble accessing financial capital and credit. So, I personally believe that all Granite Staters should have that equal opportunity to earn their success. But we know that there are significant disparities and gaps about who can access capital, and that's what we're looking to address here. So 143 will bridge that opportunity gap, give everyone the same opportunity to succeed. So we're going to bridge that opportunity gap in who has access to financial capital and credit to make sure everyone has the opportunity to succeed and grow their business. This bill, what I understand from Senator Altshuler and from the Business and Finance Authority, that a $1 million investment that is in the bill could fuel $10 million in lending from our banks and economic growth. So I think when you're thinking about I know this committee doesn't determine appropriations, but when you're thinking about the policy and you're thinking about the appropriation, that ratio is important to think about. They have calculated that a $1 million investment would fuel $10 million in lending and economic growth, and I find that pretty significant. A little more in the weeds about the Capital Access Program. I think if you're starting from that $1 million number, if you assume that an average loan size is about $75,000, and assuming there's a 3% fee, remember the borrower fee, the bank fee, assuming a 3% fee divided in half to arrive at the borrower's portion, that results in a $1,125 borrower fee allocated to the new borrower. So that means if you have $1 million divided by 1,125, we could potentially serve over 800 participants in this bill with $1 million. So that's pretty significant, and would really go a long way to get these very, very, very small businesses off the ground. The Capital Access Program within the Business and Finance Authority, again, which is, also managed by the Small Business Administration. This is one of those federal-state partnerships. The average CAP program activity is about 100 to 150 borrowers per year. And so, this allocation could serve many more folks than that. So I will stop there. I can't answer a lot of questions about the Capital Access Program, the existing one. We would, I could direct those questions to the executive director of the capital finance of this program, but certainly happy to answer any questions about the genesis of the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Wow, you're a great fill-in.
Oh, thank you.
I might call on you sometime. Just a quick question. The $1 million, what do they loan? What is their total funds that they loan out to?
Of the Capital Access Program?
Yeah, to non-social, their overall big picture.
Yeah, I don't know the total amount, but I understand that they serve about 100 to 150 borrowers in that program. So I don't know the amount of state versus federal dollars.
I was just trying to figure out if this is like a drop in the bucket for them, the $1 million, or it's a large.
Yeah, I can ask that. Yeah.
Thank you. Senator Shanley, no. Well, you're great. You were very informative. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Come on down. Good to see you, Representative. How are you today? Good.
I'm just hoping that I won't get a ticket or booed because I parked in an illegal spot or parked in somebody else's spot. So I want to get out as soon as.
It's not the governor's.
Yeah. My name is Lata Manjapudi. I represent Hillsborough 11, Nashua, and I'm one of the co-sponsors here, and also I wear several hats. I'm also a small business owner and consultant person of color, and I started that in 2019, and COVID hit, and it's been a real struggle to get past and my consultancy is based on renewable energy, net zero development, housing crisis, and I know how critical that is right now. And to have this kind of scholarship fund, loan fund. I'm not asking for a handout, but I know several who look like me, who are in the small business, who drive the economy in our state, are struggling to get past. And, you know, several of members in my community who look like me and in Nashua have lost key earning members in their family, and they have to run with it. And it's been a real challenge. And I think this would give a great breathing little oxygen to somebody who's drowning. And I think, like, and Senator really very articulately explained the program. I can't just say I understand everything, but the fact that there's an opportunity and lots of federal funding is also coming through. If state does not invest to access those fundings, it's really hard. So I think with that, I end my testimony, and I cannot answer too many questions. I'll run and move my car before I get a nasty note.
Thank you, Representative. Do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Yeah, we don't want to stay 37th, as Senator Whitley pointed out.
Thank you.
No, 25 to 37th the wrong way. Thank you very much,
Thank
Representative.
you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Would anyone else wish to testify on this bill? Seeing none? Thank you. Come on down, Senator Prentice. We'll get you in and out of here quick. I hope.
As you know, Senator Gannon, it's that time of year where we have to be 2 to 3 places.
Yeah, we're all
At
supposed
once.
to be somewhere else too. We're all. But good to see you.
Good to see you. Good morning. You're all
We're going to start SB 193. Senator Prentice is here to testify. Great to see you, Senator.
Great to see you as well. Good morning, Senator Gannon and members of the Senate Commerce Committee. For the record, my name is Sue Prentice. I'm a state senator from District 5, representing 15 communities spanning 3 counties, Grafton County, parts of Sullivan County, and parts of Merrimack County. I'm here this morning to introduce Senate Bill 193, which would amend RSA 273A3, obligation to bargain in good faith. The purpose of this amendment is to provide a tool by which the bargaining unit and the public employer will initiate a timeline to begin and to work within once a request has been made to negotiate. Collective bargaining is a process through which the union and the employer exchange proposals, share ideas, mutually solve problems, and ultimately reach a written agreement. Timeliness in this process is essential. Most times, bargaining occurs when an existing contract is going to expire. In order to ensure timely negotiations and the settlement of issues, again, time, and you'll hear me mention this time and time again, is of the essence. If a request to enter into bargaining occurs, into negotiation occurs, and it's not responded to in a timely manner, the process can be unnecessarily prolonged. At the end of this process is waiting a budget that needs to be informed of the result in order to properly complete items like setting a tax rate, adjusting pay, implementing new benefits. Senate Bill 193 asks that once a request is made to enter into negotiations, that a meeting to begin the process happen within 10 days, or by mutual agreement, the 10-day window can be extended. This opens this crucial line of communications, and it works to set expectations. Thank you for your time and your consideration in advance. I ask for your support for a motion of ought to pass. I do have some folks that are here today that can speak to this issue directly, the experiences they've had when the timeline has been prolonged. And with that, I will close my testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Seeing no questions, onward. Get to your next one.
Thank you.
Brian Hawkins. I'll ask you a question right off the bat, Brian. Why 10 days? Why not 7 days? I support the
Sure.
bill. So
Yeah, yeah,
you already gave me a hello, but
just for the record, Brian Hawkins from NEA New Hampshire. With me today is Nicole Argraves. She's a UNISERV director and a longtime negotiator. I'll start with that real quick. So the 10-day window is based off of an existing part of the collective bargaining law in Maine, and so that's where that's derived from.
thank you.
Sure, and so just to kick it off, we, as Senator Prentice said, we view this bill as a good process bill, one that will strengthen the bargaining process. As she alluded to, the time frames are crunch and tight depending on when you start, and ultimately this is about for most public services, it's the people who are delivering those and the workers, and so it benefits both sides to have a timely agreement and one that is something that both sides can work towards. So with that though, I'll leave it to Nicole to talk a little bit more about her expertise and experience.
Good morning. Is that okay? Can you hear me all right? Okay. My name is Nicole Argraves. I'm here to speak with you in support of Senate Bill 193. I've been an active union member involved in union work for over 25 years. This experience has included 15 years serving as a staff member with several unions, which include the Maine State Employees Association, the Maine Education Association, and the New Hampshire Education Association. I currently serve as a UNISERV director for the Seacoast region in New Hampshire, for the New Hampshire Education Association, representing teachers and support staff in public schools. Over the course of my tenure as a staff member, collective bargaining for employees has been a core function of the work I do on behalf of members of the union. While negotiations can be tense at times, on a whole, both parties do tend to work very hard to be professional and to find common ground as efficiently as possible. In order to make this happen, the parties have to be open, flexible, and timely with scheduling negotiation sessions. Both parties must recognize the existing timelines to get a new contract in place and thus work collaboratively to schedule meetings. However, there are occasions where this has been incredibly challenging for associations to bring boards to the table to negotiate in a timely fashion. When this happens, it undermines the mutual obligations of the parties and frustrates the entire bargaining process. In Maine, this was recognized and a process was codified into law to provide a tool for the parties to overcome any intentional or unintentional delays of the collective bargaining process after initial demand to bargain had been issued. Under Public Employer Labor Relations Law 26 MRSA, Section 965(1)B, either party in the process is able to issue a 10-day demand to bargain upon the other party. Once a demand has been issued, within 10 days after receipt of the written notice from the other party, the party receiving the notice must meet with the party issuing the notice for the purpose of bargaining. This tool ensures that the parties continue to live up to their mutual obligations to meet at reasonable times, to confer, and to negotiate in good faith during the course of negotiations. It's important to note that in Maine, they do not have a requirement to ratify collective bargaining agreements before the community, as we do here in New Hampshire, and their timelines are not as tight as ours. In Maine, only the association and board have to ratify a contract for the agreement to be in full force and effect. Nonetheless, Maine still saw the critical need to have this tool available to ensure that neither party could drag its feet in returning to the bargaining table during the negotiation process and unnecessarily delay reaching a final agreement. They saw the value in preventing an existing contract from becoming expired before a new contract could be put into place. They also saw the value in preventing further deliberations between the parties regarding retroactivity for wages and benefits related to the expiration of the contract. It was recognized that these scenarios cause unrest with the workforce and it strains labor management relations. Maine lawmakers saw the wisdom in preventing this and reinforced the mutual obligations of the parties to meet reasonable timelines by providing this tool. I was with the Maine Education Association for a little over 4 years, and I had this tool available to me. I only had to utilize this tool 3 times related to refusals to meet in a timely fashion. Weeks had gone by, and every date we offered was rejected, and no dates were offered in the alternative. When contracts were approaching expiration and labor was becoming increasingly distressed about the failure to reach an agreement. In those instances, this tool was invaluable and allowed the bargaining teams, as a last resort, to issue this notice and get the parties back to the table. Without this tool, and those contracts would have expired while we were still waiting for the other party to agree to dates to meet. Using this tool 3 times over a 4-year period isn't what I would call frequent by any means, but having it available when we truly needed it made all the difference to the workers in those public schools. In New Hampshire, as you know, we have a multi-layered process to pass contracts once agreements have been reached. First, the association ratifies, then the district, and then the community. So time has to be built into our planning well in advance of negotiations happening. Further, we don't have true evergreens, so wage freezes happen if we expire without any guarantee of retroactivity. And we have strict timelines for our SB2 districts in order to be ready for the last stage of ratification with the community. Pressure is mounting long before the initial demand to bargain has ever even been issued. Our guidelines say that in SB2 districts, we have to issue a demand to bargain 120 days before a contract expires. We also need to keep our eye on the second week of November, as we need to know roughly by November 14th if we're going to be able to reach a contract or if we're at impasse and need to look at an advanced process if we aren't close enough to settle contract by the second week of November. If we don't call impasse by the second week of November and we're not close enough to reach a contract, we won't have time for mediation and or to reconvene to finalize a contract. This means that employees will be at status quo and no new contract will be issued, no increase in wages, and no potential improvement in benefits. Being mindful of this, our demands to bargain for contracts due to be negotiated are issued in August. And roughly we have 3.5 months to get into a place where we can say confidently that we do or do not have a contract ready or soon will be ready to be ratified by the parties. Every day we wait to start the bargaining process is a day lost in that window, and we have no time to wait. Budgets are set in late November and early December. In Seacoast, I am responsible for assisting teacher and support staff locals to negotiate the collective bargaining agreements. Over the last 4 years, I've negotiated anywhere between 7 and 16 collective bargaining agreements in each cycle. During the current negotiation cycle, I had 11 contracts to negotiate and get in place by November. I can tell you with no reservation that despite issuing demands to bargain in August each year, it is extremely rare that any school board is ready and or willing to convene in August. Despite requests to meet over summer periods, the earliest dates to convene we normally receive from school boards are in mid-September. Some even offer starting dates in October. I've had 2 school boards in my region offer starting dates in late October. Both have also had delays in the process as well. This left us with less than a month before I had to make a call on whether or not we needed to call impasse. In both those scenarios, we had to go to mediation, and the parties had to pay for an advanced process that likely would not have been needed if we had started earlier. We were able to successfully reach an agreement in one of those contracts in a timely fashion, in time enough at least to get ratified by the community. But in the other contract, we were not able to reach an agreement. And those support staff went with an increase for an entire school year. This was unnecessary had we started early enough. Speaking from experience, I can tell you that in most cases, late starts and delays in the bargaining process has to do with schedules of specific individuals chosen to serve on school boards and or attorneys of the school boards if they are using one. It seems that availability to negotiate at reasonable times isn't always part of the formula when choosing board team members, particularly during the summer period. This can also be true of the associations. And we work diligently to make our members aware that if they want to serve on the bargaining team, they need to have flexible schedules, and we need to get to the table as soon as possible. When we are unsuccessful in negotiating in a timely fashion, we don't have a contract ready in time, and our teachers and support staff contracts expire. Wages and benefits aren't addressed. Retroactivity becomes a bone of contention during the next regular labor relations cycle, and steps on the wage scale are no longer in line with experience. When seasoned employees become frozen on step due to an expired contract, often this means that new hires are being brought into the district at a step closer, if not at or above the level of seasoned employees. Employees then feel undervalued and labor management relations worsen, and we see the exodus of seasoned employees from those districts where this occurs. We are not in a time and place with education that we can afford to let that happen. We have an obligation to meet at reasonable times and to support our schools, public education, teachers, and our support staff. Senate Bill 193 will establish a requirement for the parties to meet within 10 days once a request to bargain has been issued by one bargaining team and received by the other. I am before you today asking that you support this bill. This bill provides a vital tool for the parties to have available if necessary and will ensure that both teams are upholding their mutual obligation to meet at reasonable times. As I experienced in Maine, I suspect having the tool available will be a last resort and will not be used frequently. However, having this tool will motivate both teams to continue to engage in a timely fashion. SB 193 will help preserve positive management labor relations between the parties and will make a significant difference for public education employees in districts where delays become an issue during the bargaining process. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for your testimony. Do you have any questions? Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And does anyone else wish to testify who didn't sign in? Seeing none? Thank you. I saw Senator Carson, didn't I? See if she's up there. You check, do you have a little way to check on church to see if it's the right time? Yes. Sorry about the Senator.
No, my apologies, Mr. Chair. I was just copying a proposed amendment to the committee, so I just wanted to make sure that you had it for your deliberations.
Thank you. I can give my question right now, but we'll wait. We're going to start SB 195. We are fortunate to have the very knowledgeable and experienced Senator Carson here. And good to see you, Senator.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of Senate Commerce. For the record, my name is Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising the towns of Londonderry, Hudson, and Auburn. And I have for your consideration Senate Bill 195 FN relative to the purchase of steel products with the Buy America certification. And this bill revises changes that were made in the America contract requirements for certain steel contracts. Mr. Chairman, we had a very, very similar bill to this last year, which passed both the House and the Senate and was signed into law. But there were some provisions in that legislation that the steel manufacturers felt were very important that needed to come forward. So that is what you have here in the bill, and it does a few things. There are 4 items that were not addressed in the state statute last year. One is New Hampshire Buy American Steel is for the large fabricated steel items and does not include small items like nuts, bolts, hinges, etc. Secondly, this law applies to only state projects, $1 million or more, and not maintenance projects. 3, state-funded contracts must identify steel products in the project document so all bidders are aware of this requirement. And 4, it sets up a procedure for the administrative services to allow for waivers where there may be supply chain or availability issues. And I believe, Mr. Chairman, the proposed language that I've handed out addresses most of those concerns. The other is addressed within the bill itself. I'm going to conclude my testimony at this point, Mr. Chair. Members of the Steel Manufacturers Associations are here to speak, and they will be able to answer your questions much better than I can. So I thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Senator Carson. I'll ask them the questions then.
Okay, thank you.
Gary Abbott, come on down. Can I ask you a question first, Gary? Because I'm going to have to run out of here at a moment's notice. And we'll just start with the question rather than we do it backwards.
Okay.
Is that okay? And then you can go testify.
Sure.
It's easy to flag wave and say, I want to buy a US product. We all want to do that. So my problem is cost benefit analysis. How much more is it going to cost New Hampshire? So at the beginning, I didn't understand all that we had so much involvement in steel production, my ignorance. And so now I do say, I have seen last year and again, testimony and people sending in this year that we do have companies that are going to benefit from a bill like this. So that's good. On the other side of the hand, how much more am I paying? Is a lot of the benefit going to Pennsylvania steel companies because I'm buying US steel, or am I really helping? Is it costing me a lot of money to buy more expensive steel to only benefit a few small New Hampshire companies? So am I hurting my localities, building schools and hospitals and all those things?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. For the record, my name's Gary Abbott. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Associated General Contractors of New Hampshire. I think you're driving to the policy question.
Okay.
The policy question was passed by the legislature last year. This bill isn't really about the policy question of whether to implement it and what it costs. It's about clarity for the contractors who have to perform to the policy change that you made. Because you did pass a Buy America state steel legislation that requires fabricators and the steel process being made in the United States. We currently have this on a number of federal projects that the state works on. So the commercial construction industry is very familiar with it. I think I'm not trying to go away from your question. I'm not trying to go away from your question.
I should push that question more.
I think that question more was for last year when the legislature made that decision, because I will tell you from a contractor's standpoint, they're going to say, yeah, you eliminate products, you raise costs. But now what this bill does is tries to fix the vagueness of last year's bill. The Senate did these things in their version of the bill, but it was taken out in a committee of conference. It was on the crypto bill. I don't know how it ended up on the crypto bill, and it became very vague. And so from the industry aspect, we're looking to put back those clarity things that the Senate had put in. So I think that's why you also see on the list a lot of contractors in favor of this, because right now it's so vague. And the current law just, the state doesn't have waiver. And I think to answer your question, this bill addresses that because it allows the state, who it's the state's policy, to do a waiver in case of cost, in case of availability. So that's why we want this, but it's not the contractor's decision. It's going to be the state's decision through administrative services. So we felt that's a better scenario than the court system that the current law says. Every contractor was afraid everybody would contest and projects would be held up in court. So I think Senator Carson did a good job in explaining the 4 items that this does. I think it's not it's a little slightly different language because we learned from what the House objected to. We took out any of those kind of objections, but we made this work. And I think that's why you're going to find on your sign-up list a number of contractors that are in support of this, because they came to me and said, clarity, we need those things to clarify that the Senate had put in last year. I hope that answered your question, because that's really what this bill is about. I think the senator did a great job. It tries to get rid of what we objected to last year, that it wasn't clear in nuts and bolts and those kind of things. It clarifies it was for large commercial where you have the fabricated steel. It was for fabrication of large items. Nobody wants to get hung up on you need a screw or a bolt from Home Depot. And so this also gives all that transparency by being in the contract documents. We think it's going to be easy for the state, whether it's DOT or whether it's administrative services, when the projects are designed, what items are part of this requirement. So that in itself is really what this bill is about, and I just hope the Senate Commerce Committee passes this legislation. So I hope that answered your question.
It's crystal clear. I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What do we have next? Holly, I won't say your last name. Novolsky?
Noveletsky.
Okay.
I'm Holly Noveletsky. I'm the owner of Novel Iron in Greenland, New Hampshire. Nice to see you. Thank you for the opportunity. May I just address your one question you had about the
Sure.
Bethlehem? Quickly, is the important word in this, in the original law and this, is fabricated. So the work is actually being done by New Hampshire fabricators who do the work here. We buy the raw material.
Yep.
From Bethlehem, well, it used to be Bethlehem, but other places, but we're still doing the work. So it does benefit companies in New Hampshire. We are in support of this bill. We just ask that in Section G in the original law, that there's a change from the Code of Standard Practice that states 2016, just to the latest, so that every year we don't have to update it when the new Code of Standard comes out. Okay, but we're in support of this.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Quick
Seeing
enough?
none, thank you for your testimony. Does anyone else wish to testify who didn't sign in? Seeing none, thank you. How am I doing, Erin? She hasn't called? Yeah. Okay. I was looking for you in Philly.
I was there.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready. Senator, I'm ready. Seven. Good to see you. I've missed you for a couple of years now.
4 years, been a long time. Good morning, Senators. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dan Ennis from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7. And I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 196, which was brought on behalf of rideshare operators. And after discussions with the Insurance Commission and others, the primary interested parties in this bill have asked that it be re-referred. So I would ask that the committee please consider doing so. Any questions?
No.
Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak on this bill? Okay, sure. All in favor?
Aye.
Discussion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Vote on consent. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Who wants to take it?
Second.
Oh, yeah, it's yours.
I'll take it, yeah, fine.
Thank you, Seth. Motion to come out of
So moved. Aye. our best to get through it. I think the memories will come back. You're introducing?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I would like to open the hearing on Senate Bill 144 and welcome Senator Susie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Whoops. Oh, flying. Maybe use the book in front of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Donna Susie. I represent Senate District 18, and I am here today to introduce Senate Bill 144. I hope you will join me in celebrating what I think is a momentous day. This is the 10th anniversary of my sponsoring minimum wage legislation. So thank you. Thank you. This bill would incrementally increase the minimum wage to $13 an hour in September of 2023 and $15 an hour by July of 2024. 27 states are increasing their minimum wage statutes. Many did on the first day of this new year. New Hampshire, however, did not. In New England, New Hampshire is grossly behind the other states. As you can see from this visual, and I think it's really, really stark. We could swing it around after for those in the audience to see, but Rhode Island is at $13 an hour, Vermont $13.18, Maine $13.80, both Massachusetts and Connecticut at $15 an hour. And there sits New Hampshire at $7.25. And I'll talk about some of the other states, but I think it's really important to focus on our region and New England. Since we're bordered by 3 states, people live significantly along those borders and can easily cross those borders to go to work, and many of them do. New Hampshire's minimum wage ranges from $5 to $7 less per hour when compared to our surrounding states. The other states we are competing with, most notably those in New England, are continuing to raise their minimum wage. In some cases, these rates are double the rate paid here in New Hampshire. Right now, we're in a workforce shortage, and we're actually in a crisis that we can't continue down if we want to be responsible stewards of our state and our economy. Oregon is one state I want to highlight because they have a particularly unique way to address wage equity through increasing the minimum wage, as they base it on increases in the Consumer Price Index. But rural and urban areas have different wages in relation to the standard minimum. The Portland metro area is set at $1.25 above the standard wage, and non-urban counties are set at $1 below the standard wage. So I point that out as one way to sort of look at different means by which other states look at the wage as opposed to across the board in the state. There's no question that the pandemic exposed the greatest issues facing Granite Staters, which are low pay and financial insecurity. $7.25 is antiquated, and it's time to fix it as we're faced with a labor shortage and rising inflation. According to the Consumer Price Index, national inflation rose to 8.3% between August of 2021 and August of 2022. 11 states have statutory requirements for raising minimum wages in line with inflation. In Arizona, for example, the hourly minimum wage will increase $1.05 to $13.85 from $12.80, or about that 8.2%. Other states raising wages due to inflation include Alaska, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, Ohio, South Dakota, Vermont, and Washington. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., will also raise its minimum wage in accordance with inflation. I think all of us driving around our local communities certainly recognize the help wanted signs. And despite businesses offering $15 an hour, workers cannot be found to fill many of these positions. The signs stay up. And I believe that's because workers have evaluated the time and quality of time and what that means to them in their lives. And I think we, in turn, should value our New Hampshire workers. Our aging population
needs a strong workforce to support those citizens who have paid into the system over the years and are depending on services to be available. One of our most critical shortage areas is in long-term care, and part of the reason is because the wages are very low. Couple that with New Hampshire's housing shortage, with a 0.5% vacancy rate for rentals and rising rents overall, make it particularly pressing that we ensure that wages are helping people to live and thrive here in New Hampshire. Granite staters who work full-time are forced to turn to government assistance in some cases due to our inability to pay a living wage. It should be surprising and it should be downright shameful to most people that a person who works 40 hours a week at $7.25 an hour with no time off would make only $15,000 a year, well below the federal poverty level and certainly well below the ability to find housing and adequate services for themselves and their family here in New Hampshire. Matter of fact, I read a tweet recently that pointed out that if minimum wage jobs were only for high school students, why are these businesses that are looking for help open during school hours? In fact, minimum wage jobs occur in various sectors. According to the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, there are about 100,000 Granite Staters living in poverty. 1 in 4 Granite State households had less than $50,000 per year in income, and more than 1 in 6 had less than $35,000. When I first introduced this bill, as I said, it's the anniversary, in 2013, 10 years ago, the average cost of a 2-bedroom apartment, including utilities, average statewide was $1,076. Today, that number is over $1,584. And yet still, you see, the wage remains the same. Raising our minimum wage would most directly impact low-wage workers, reducing spending on state assistance programs. Once again, I can't emphasize enough that low-paid workers qualify for public assistance. So we are essentially subsidizing those entities that provide low pay. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics states that roughly 20% of workers who earn their state's minimum wage are age 45 or older. 45 or older, think of that. In 2021, the legislature was able to lower our business profits tax, and yet it would seem that we would also recognize the need at the same time to benefit those who live at the poverty line and increase the wage. You know, during the pandemic, while many of us had the ability to be home and continue working, there were minimum wage workers who were often called into their service jobs. And as a result, they were considered essential. You were able to leave your home and provide yourself with whatever protection you needed and went into a grocery store. And there were people working there. And those people were working for a lot less than the wages paid in our surrounding states. So if these individuals are deemed essential during a health pandemic, then their salaries should reflect the reality of the financial circumstances we're in. I think it's important that we raise the minimum wage to send workers a message, the rest of the country a message, and those who would like to come to New Hampshire, we want them to recognize that we value workers in our state and that we want everyone to be able to thrive. With that, I would conclude my testimony and be happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Any questions? I just have one. Do you, or maybe does someone testifying, know what the average hourly wage is in New Hampshire for non-salaried employees presently?
For non-salaried employees, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I bet we could get it for you from Employment Security, Mr. Chairman. Be happy to do so.
All right, thank you. All right, any other? All right, thank you for your introduction. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Alan Raff, please. Morning.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members. It's an honor to be here in the Senate again. I miss you guys. My name is Alan Raff, and I come before you today on behalf of the New Hampshire AFL-CIO and our over 35,000 members to urge you to vote opt to pass on Senate Bill 144. As the committee well knows, New Hampshire is an expensive state to live in. As of the third quarter of 2022, it's the 11th most costly state, in fact. As an organization that represents workers across all of New Hampshire's employment sectors, we have a unique perspective on the true cost of living here. The metrics are well known to, I'm sure, you and anybody who owns or works in a business in the state. And in 2023, a wage of $7.25 per hour is woefully inadequate to support those working for it. To cite just a few examples, a minimum wage worker would need to work over 100 hours per week just to afford a one-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That number goes up to 145 hours a week if that worker has a child and needs a two-bedroom apartment. According to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which I'm sure you've heard of, a single adult without children in New Hampshire needs to earn more than $17 per hour to make ends meet. A single adult raising children obviously needs even more. The current state of inflation has made these conditions even worse. Now, I've sat through hundreds of hearings, meetings, seminars here in the state, many with you at this table, where advocates and politicians talk about the importance of retaining workers, both young and not so young. And I can tell you as someone who was once young, that one of the key factors for getting us to stay is being able to make money and having enough of that money to allow us to enjoy the amazing things that our state has to offer. Here in New Hampshire, where well over half of our population lives within 30 minutes of a state border, and those bordering states each have a minimum wage that is $13 or more, if you need to make money, you're going to make that commute for those $5 extra an hour. You get $5 extra an hour for your efforts, and these contracts are contracts that aren't even bargained for. We like to do things in New Hampshire the New Hampshire way. We don't follow the paths of other states because we have our own way of doing things. It's one of the great things about New Hampshire. But if our goal, as we always say that it is to expand our economy, to grow our workforce, and continue on our path of economic success, we need to pay people more money. Perception is reality. And if you perceive you're going to make more money and live a more comfortable life because you know you're guaranteed $13 an hour in Maine, Vermont, or Massachusetts, more in Massachusetts, you would be economically irresponsible not to go and earn those wages to provide for your family. Now, we understand the arguments against it and the importance of the free market principles involved, and it's because we do understand those principles that we know that workers work harder when they are compensated appropriately for their work. We know that when they have dignity in their work, they go the extra mile for their employer and for themselves. And that's why we support Senator Soucy's bill, because you need to be able to provide for your family and live your life with dignity. And in New Hampshire, you want to be able to enjoy the amazing things that our state has to offer, whether it's our beaches, our mountains, or a new brewery that's popping up down the street. And when a worker can enjoy those things in the state they live in, they build the local economy, they contribute to the livelihood of small businesses, and they amplify the New Hampshire advantage. Running a business is hard work, as you guys know. And being an employer is an expensive deal. But we all know that if you're compensated appropriately for your work, you take pride in that work, and you make the business that you work for a better business. And a better business makes more money. When people make enough money to keep the lights on, put food on the table, and also have the funds available to take their family camping in the White Mountains, that helps our employers, their employees, and the state's economy. We don't follow the lead of any state in New England, or the country for that matter, and we never have. We do things our way. So let's do this in New Hampshire way. Let's show off our neighboring states. We have a great thing going on here, but we can make the economy even better, stronger, and more resilient. And that is the New Hampshire way, to adapt responsibly, grow exponentially, and retain our unique place in our great country. That's why we urge the committee to vote out to pass on Senate Bill 144. I thank you for your time, Chairman, committee members.
Thank you. One question to sort of start us off, and I don't know the number right now, so I'm asking this innocently. Do you know the state unemployment rate for New Hampshire?
I do not off the top of my head.
And I wonder how it compares to the states that have the higher minimum wage. Because the case has been made that employees are looking at the other states and saying, you know, I'm not going to work in New Hampshire, I'm going to go work in Maine instead, pay income tax. And I'm real curious about those numbers.
Yeah, I can speak just from the labor union side of things that when we have a hard time getting people to come to work in New Hampshire at all, because generally when you're working on a job in Massachusetts versus New Hampshire, even if it is good, a union contracted for, a bargain for contract, they're going to go take that job in Massachusetts because they're going to make more money. And we have a hard time filling it.
So why wouldn't the employers here raise the wages? This is the way free markets work. And if you go on Indeed.com today, you can't find jobs in New Hampshire for less than 13 an hour. You can't find them.
Well, I think that, as you ran a business, a service industry, I believe, correct? And which is awesome. I someday hope to own a motel myself. Not that yours is a motel, but I love the idea of it. And I think that, as a business person, sometimes you think, well, why would I do this if I make more money this way? And the fact is that sometimes when you end up having to pay the extra because times change, things cost more money right now. And you pay more, the people are happier. And like I said, a happy employee is a better employee in our experience.
Well, speaking of hospitality, Bill Marriott once said that the most important people in his hotels are the employees. And I would agree. Other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your testimony. Henry Vayu and Ava, could you reposition that so I can see everybody? Thank you.
It's a very good poster. I like it.
It's a nice poster.
Good anchor.
Yeah, it drives home the point. Over there, be fine if that's okay. Fine with it. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Henry Bayer, and I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association. And let me just state up front that it pains me to be in a position to oppose the legislation from the good senator from Manchester, but I must. The Restaurant Association brings their perspective of the issue of the tip wage, which is something that really a lot of people don't understand how it all works. And 2 years ago, when Senators Innes and Shanley were taking a sabbatical from the Senate, the legislature passed and the governor signed a bill that took the tip wage from, it said at that time, it still says in the statute, 45% of the applicable minimum wage is the tip wage for the tipped employees. And it's still in the statute. However, there is an introductory paragraph, which you don't see in Senate Bill 144, but if you look in the statute, there's an introductory paragraph that says, if the federal minimum wage is increased, the tip wage goes to $3.27. It sets a numeric, it sets the number in statute instead of an adjusting wage. This sets it back to or makes the more permanent, the 45%, and does away with the language that was passed 2 years ago to set it at $3.27. And that's the primary issue that we have with this legislation. Tipped employees are not minimum wage workers. They're the highest paid. If you ask anyone in the back of the house that is making $12, $13 an hour, they'd like to work in the front of the house. And at $3.27 with tips, walk home with $20, $22 an hour, they will tell you they'd rather work in the front of the house. So it's unique in that perspective, but the tip wage is in the minimum wage law. So that's all I would have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions? All right, hearing none, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Oh, I need help. I'm struggling with the handwriting here, but Linda Ruth Barrage? Okay, please. I never turn down offers for help. Good morning.
Good morning. Copies of my testimony. Good morning. My name is Linda Ruth Berger. I am a longtime resident of Kentucky and practice as a mental health provider in Concord.
Thank you.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experience with you. I've come to share the experience about what impact our present minimum wage has on the mental health of individuals, families, and communities in our state. I hope you'll consider the critical importance now more than ever your vote to raise the minimum wage could have. I'm moved to be here by what I've learned firsthand about the negative impact of economic security on mental health from those I've been privileged to work with during my 43 years as a New Hampshire licensed clinical mental health provider. During these years, I've worked at the Community Mental Health Center, Emergency and Adult Services, Concord Hospital Emergency Room, and in group and private practice, and I am still working. This legislator, along with the governor, have expressed a commitment to addressing solutions to the crisis in mental care availability, as well as to the uplifting of healthy families in our state. The present minimum wage, as you know, cannot support a family. What may not be as obvious as some of the other significant consequences is the impact poverty and economic hardship have on undermining the mental health of our state's families and children. I have seen how the conditions of sublivable wages creates home environments that bring parents into a chronic state of anxiety, stress, depression, and despair. These day-to-day economic conditions for any of us could lead to a decreased ability to cope and to increased presence of anger, parental absence, and the inability to regulate otherwise stable emotions. The chronic pressure and anxiety about daily economic survival become the conditions for children to go without the nurturing environment with their parents they need to grow into confident, emotionally healthy, well-functioning citizens. I am sure there are many of us in this room, including some of you, that were raised in homes where chronic economic hardship made the otherwise naturally loving relationships of a secure home impossible. Each of your votes on this legislation will hold you personally responsible for the ever-escalating consequences, short and long-term, of the mental health and well-being, or lack of it, in our communities. Your vote on SB 144 will either support the conditions for good emotional development and mental health, or it will keep families in bondage to the natural human consequences of a substandard, perpetually insecure economic reality. The impact of asking a whole population of hardworking New Hampshire citizens to accept our minimum wage is to communicate that we simply do not value their dignity, their lives, or their families. The emotional consequences may include self-devaluation, depression, despair, domestic violence, parental neglect, substance abuse, and sometimes, tragically, suicide. To be treated as disposable while fighting for economic survival, as we know, can also lead to antisocial and other more lucrative criminal activity. How can anyone care for a culture that so flagrantly does not care for them? I have heard arguments that raising the minimum wage would have untoward consequences for businesses in our state. But I would like to have confidence that we can raise the minimum wage and then, with your collective creativity and resourcefulness, find other solutions for supporting businesses without laying the weight of a business healthy state on the back of our lowest paid, hardworking citizens. My colleagues and I can't help people become stronger when the ground holding them up is continually falling out beneath them. Mental health providers are attempting, individual after individual, marriage after marriage, family after family, to address their mental health needs, but sending them back into living situations that are chronically creating and keeping them in despair. I've come in good faith to ask you to consider the well-being of families, children, and our communities by raising this substandard wage to a livable wage. To continue to not do so will simply grow the destructive cultural trends we all want so deeply to heal. I have included in your copies of my testimony a list of mental health providers who have endorsed this statement. And I also have listed a link where you can go to the CDC and learn about what is now regularly used by both primary care physicians and mental health providers with children up to 17 years age about what's now called the ACE scale, the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale. And you will know when you go there that the very first suggestion about how to prevent mental illness in children, in families, is to support financial security. Thank you very much for your care and your attention.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? All right, thank you very much. Bruce Berkey, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For your record, my name is Bruce Berkey. I'm with Sheehan Finney Capital Group here in Concord. And this morning I appear before you on behalf of the over 1,400 small business members of the National Federation of Independent Business. And the NFIB, for short, is opposed to Senate Bill 144. And I've had truly a pleasure of having interactions with Senator Soucy on this issue for the last 10 years. And you couldn't find anyone more pleasant to work with, whether on the same side of an issue or perhaps at opposite ends of an issue, but it's always a pleasure, Senator. NFIB is opposed to this bill for several reasons, primarily economic driven. And I always get a little nervous talking about economic dynamics and examples in front of the former dean of the business school at UNH, but I'll do my best.
No grades today.
No grades today, good. Well, Senator Soucy may have a grade for me later. In any event, there are concerns with mandating, requiring a certain minimum wage within the business community. Because of it establishes an artificial threshold, and it's not market driven. And if it's not market driven, you can have fewer jobs at a particular business. You could have fewer hours for those employees at a particular business, and it ends up hurting the very employees that advocates of a higher minimum wage are trying to assist. And another very real concern is that there could be fewer businesses as well, and certainly opportunities for employees as automation develops in our economy. I'd like to give you an example of one tourism industry driver in the state of New Hampshire that I do some work for. And I was meeting with them back in, I think, in November or December of last year. And they were asked about what their starting wages were going to be this winter. And the range was from $16 per hour to $20 per hour. And this was in the tourism community, in which there was parking involved, in which there was, food and beverage involved. And so these were and are, beginning wages for beginning roles within that particular industry. So I think that what we're seeing in New Hampshire is a market that is working for employees. We do have, and to answer or address your earlier question, Mr. Chairman, I believe that New Hampshire does have the lowest unemployment rate in New England, and that organizations have also rated New Hampshire's economy as the best economy in the Northeast. So I think that what we're doing in New Hampshire is working. I think it is beneficial for businesses and employees in this state. And the concern with going up to a $13 or $15 rate for people who are already making $15, $16, $17 an hour, and this is where I get into my concern with the former dean of the business school, is the concept of wage compression.
Yes.
And if you have someone making $16 an hour today, and the minimum wage goes up to $15 per hour, all of a sudden, that person who's at $16 an hour is saying, I'm only making $1 more than minimum wage, and I've been here for 6 months or 10 months or a year. I think I deserve a raise. And so you create that, I don't want to call it friction, but you create that dynamic that is going to have an impact on a small business in the state. And so that whole wage scale for that small business that now has a $15 minimum wage in state law, for that person who's making 16, that person's going to want to make $18 or $20 per hour. And then that person who's already at 20 is saying, well, he's going up to 18 or 20, I should be at 24. And so you get this upward pressure on the whole wage scale of that business and all businesses. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll curtail my remarks, and I'd be happy to try and address any questions that you or the committee may have.
I may. So if we get into that upward spiral in wages, what happens? What's the fallout from that?
Well, I think
because some people would say, well, that's great. Everybody gets lifted.
Absolutely, and it is good until that business has a finite number of resources or revenues or whatever the case may be. And that gets into what I said at the outset of my remarks. That employee may get fewer hours, that employee may get laid off, the business owner may go to automation, or the business may go away.
Is there an impact on prices?
Without a doubt.
All right. One final question. Is it easier for large companies like Walmart and Target to adapt to a minimum wage increase than it is for the small businesses that make up a large proportion of our state's business?
I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Senator.
We're working off of Senator Ennis's idea. I bring everything back home to my town. Got a nice little pizza place. Do you know roughly, and they tell me do not raise the minimum wage. Your pizza was $8 or $9 a couple of years ago. It's now 16 or 17 for a large cheese in Sandown, New Hampshire. He goes, we can't get the people, we can't afford it, and your pizzas are going to be $20 if we start raising the minimum wage. Do you know what percent of small businesses like mom and pop pizza places, how much labor is labor a cost factor as opposed to material overhead building? Is labor like there must be a fixed number that Senator Ennis, being a professor, probably knows, like a 20% number, and if you raise that part of the cost so much, you're raising everything.
First of all, I don't know the answer.
Okay.
But second of all, I do know that differs from type of business to type of business.
Okay. How much is a large pizza in your hometown? I have a lot of kids that buy a lot of pizza.
I'm
So I
guessing
judge
it's-
the economy by pizza.
I think it's at least $17.99 or so.
Okay,
yeah.
that's a lot. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Depending on how many toppings.
I can't get toppings in my house. Thank you.
I have to say this. My economics professor, the first econ professor I ever had, pizza was always his example. So you're
good
right,
example.
right on point.
Very good.
Any others? Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. All right. Is it viola? Is that, yes. It's a lovely name, lovely instrument.
I think it'd be viable.
No, it's viola. I mean, yeah. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. For the record, my name is Viola Katsime, and I'm here representing the Granite State Organizing Project. We are a grassroots organization that brings people together, faith, labor, community groups, to work towards a more just world. I'm here to express our support for SB 144. We are here in support because we're talking a bill here that would gradually raise the minimum wage. This is not a radical policy. When you consider that if the minimum wage had kept up with the productivity growth since 1960, it would be more than $25 an hour. That's according to an analysis that has been done by the Economic Policy Institute. But here in New Hampshire, instead, we've decided not to do anything about the minimum wage and leave it to stay stagnant since 2009. When you think about that, if you look at the cost of goods and services, nothing has stayed the same since 2009. I know our inflation rate before the pandemic was around 2%, maybe 2.5%. Still, prices were going up and minimum wage was still the same. I also want to remind the committee that in 2019, Raise Up New Hampshire, which is a coalition that I'm part of, we ran a minimum wage challenge and we invited legislators to take part in that. And what we asked them was that come and live in the shoes of low-wage workers who are making $7.25 an hour. Try to live on their wages for a week and see what that life is like. And guess what? We only got a few takers for that challenge. Only a few reps tried that. And they came back to us and told us it was so difficult to even get by just buying groceries. And that's the reality of most Granite Staters that are making $7, $8, $10, $11, or even $12 an hour. We know that food prices, housing costs, childcare costs, healthcare costs have risen drastically. But again, we are stuck at $7.25. We should ask ourselves, how are people making this work? And Senator Donna Susie mentioned earlier about a lot of low-wage workers who are relying on public assistance. I remember when I used to work at one of the retail stores back in my college days, we always saw workers who we were contributing cans of food for other workers. And this is a multi-million company that can afford to raise wages. But we were getting paid $8.25 an hour at the time. And so a lot of the folks that were working there who had kids and families, I don't know how they were making it. I was a college student with no responsibility, but we did this to make sure that we're supporting other workers. So that's the reality of workers in New Hampshire. I won't go into the numbers. Previous speakers spoke about the cost of a one-bedroom apartment and what's needed, and the MIT calculator that's needed. But you hear arguments that no one in New Hampshire is making $7.25 an hour. That's false. The 2021 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that there are 9,000 workers in New Hampshire who are earning at least $7.25 an hour. And those that are making less than $15 an hour, that number is about 101,000 workers. I'm happy to share the information with you after this. So SB 144 puts us on a path towards a living wage. Again, citing the fact that the living wage is supposed to be $17 an hour in the state of New Hampshire.
But I just want to share a little story that I've had experience with. My organization opened up a tenant clinic during the pandemic. We were helping tenants who are struggling with rent apply for rent assistance. We were connecting those that needed services that are facing eviction, get legal assistance. And one of the tenants that I know who actually works full-time, she has a full-time job. She works at the Mall of New Hampshire. She has to work 50 hours a week to be able to qualify for a one-bedroom apartment. And she's making $16 an hour. If she did make that 10 extra hours, she would not qualify income-wise. And that's the reality of people that are facing homelessness in our state. There are people that are working, but they cannot afford to put a roof over their head. So that's like one clear example, $16 an hour, but she has to maintain 50 hours a week. That 10 extra hours make a big difference in her life. So I just want to say that I hope that you consider raising the minimum wage this time. And like we've had previously, when low-wage workers have money, they're spending that on day-to-day services, food, rent, taking out their kids. And so that helps the local businesses and our local economy. And people are actually able to live an independent life, not have to rely on public assistance to support their families. So I hope and I urge you to consider passing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you so much.
it. Claudia Estelle, is that correct? Not here? Not here. Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on Senate Bill 144? Yes, you are. I missed you. I'm sorry about that. Please.
Thank you and good morning. I am the Reverend John Gregory Davis, and along with my partner Susan, I co-pastor the Congregational Church in Meriden, New Hampshire. I come before you this morning as a member of the Clergy Caucus of the Granite State Organizing Project and as co-chair of the Economic Justice Mission Group of the New Hampshire Conference of the United Church of Christ. And it is both as a local church pastor and as a member of the largest Protestant denomination in New Hampshire, which has consistently advocated for raising our state's shamefully low minimum wage, that I firmly support SB 144. I want to thank Senator Soucy for her consistent advocacy. That this is the 10th year is, I suppose, a celebration, but also a travesty. 10 years and we still can't get this right. For far too long, we have inflicted upon our fellow citizens the New Hampshire disadvantage of having the lowest minimum wage by far of any state in New England. Unlike every other New England state, New Hampshire has had no minimum wage for over a decade now, with the exception of the embarrassingly low federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. You don't need to be an economist to understand two obvious moral travesties of the situation. First, that no one can support themselves, no matter how hard they work on this paltry wage. And secondly, that none of us would wish to see anyone we know or love forced to work for such inadequate compensation. The contention that the minimum wage was never intended to be livable is patently false, fake news. On the contrary, it was precisely because he considered it morally and humanely untenable that working people not be able to support themselves through their labor that President Roosevelt proposed a living wage minimum back in 1933, which of course hasn't been adjusted for inflation in any significant way. Yet as a state, we have chosen so to devalue the labor and dignity of our fellow citizens as to be a wage sinkhole in New Hampshire, as the chart makes so clear. How can anyone oppose remedying such an injustice? How can we choose not to pay workers the wages needed to support themselves and their families? How do we live with knowing that our state chooses to allow more than 9,000 of our neighbors to be paid starvation wages? From a moral and economically just perspective, this isn't complicated. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. insisted that all labor has dignity and thus deserves to be adequately compensated. This is not about the economic worth of any job. nor the skills of the person doing the job, but rather about the person themselves. I want to say that again. Sometimes we hear, well, that job isn't worth that amount. It's not about the job. If a job needs to be done by a person, that person is worthy of being paid adequately. And the notion that, well, if they want a better job, they want to get paid more, let's get another job. Well, what if all those jobs that we choose to pay inadequately, people simply cease doing them? Clearly, if the job is important to us enough to ask a person to do it, then we either value that person by paying them well, or we tell them, frankly, we appreciate your work, but we don't care. We don't, pardon me, we don't value you as a person. The good news is that we can do better. Every other New England state has. Surely New Hampshire can as well. We can choose to reclaim the original vision of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We can choose to follow the lead of every other New England state, or as the gentleman earlier said, we could even choose to be a leader instead of a backslider. And perhaps most importantly, I want to emphasize this, we can choose to reclaim our humanity through acknowledging the humanity of every worker with wages worthy of their personhood. SB 144 begins to move us in this long overdue direction. It's not enough, but it is a critical step forward. For the sake of every worker in our state, and again, for the sake of our shared humanity, I urge you to vote ought to pass on SB 144. This is an injustice we can address, and it's long past time to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Senator.
I'll bite. I shouldn't, but so you were talking about just open conversation.
Sure, yeah,
is a good
yeah,
thing for
sure.
me, even though it gets me into trouble.
Okay.
You were talking about everyone deserves not just a wage, but I think you said would you say my 14-year-old daughter she wants to get a summer job, there's an ice cream place downtown, Sandown. Would you say he has to give her a living wage, or is there a minimum wage? So you're arguing that, because at one point you did say that everyone who should make a living.
Frankly, I'd like to see us go to a livable wage. I guess you answer the question for me. Is your daughter worthy of being paid?
She's not worthy of making a living wage to support herself at this point.
All right. So clearly, if we wanted to address that, we could find a way. But the fact that there are 9,000 people in our state being underpaid, being paid this minimum wage, never mind being underpaid, the point is we keep making excuses for why we can't pay people who have families to support a living wage. And I'm not going to get into the question of whether your daughter is worth it. You have to determine whether your daughter is worthy of being paid a livable wage. That's not my issue. But I do believe every person is worthy. If the job needs to be done, the person doing it deserves to be paid adequately. I won't back down from that position. I'm sorry that you might.
And I'll just, one more time, and then we'll give up on
Sure.
it. But so again, she brings very little skills to the job. She's never worked a cash register. She's never scooped one scoop yet.
Yeah.
So she's on the day one. She's not really bringing in much to the business. And as she goes, I know he gives like at 3 months, as you've learned more, he gives you $1 or $2 raise, and he does raise. So it's sort of I look at the minimum wage as a training wage for young people, and I think it's a very small
and maybe if it was only paid to young people, maybe that would be reasonable. The fact is that's not the case. So it's a bit of a red herring. We're talking about you're talking about one situation, we're talking about a situation that applies to far more people. And again, I would argue, once again, if the job needs to be done, the person doing it deserves to be paid adequately.
So as she learns more, my 14 becomes my 15, 16, she's going to be worth a lot more money too. She can go to Dunkin' Donuts.
I contend she's worth that now. She's a person. I'm sorry. Okay. I don't agree to this.
Understand.
Okay. I'm glad you got it. Good.
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Senator Susan.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Is there anyone else that I may have missed, or anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, please.
I have a lot of adrenaline. I just didn't.
Yeah, go take a walk. I'm kidding.
Good morning, Chair Gagnon and members of the Senate Commerce Committee. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak out of turn and listening to my testimony in support of SB 144. I'm Claudia Estelle. I live in Ackworth, and I'm a member of Raise Up New Hampshire. In my experience in speaking with voters about their concerns, the economy is often mentioned. And in discussing the minimum wage, there is often disbelief and dismay that New Hampshire doesn't have a minimum wage and relies on the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, which hasn't been raised since 2009, over 13 years ago, and during which time inflation has increased by more than 24%. With labor market pressures, these voters are sure that no one still earns the minimum wage. Often people think it's a training wage, as Senator Gagnon suggested. However, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 9,000 New Hampshire workers earn $7.25 an hour or less at sub-minimum wage jobs, not including tipped work. And a lot of those people are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, have families, have experience on the job. This is only 2.3% of New Hampshire workforce, but for these workers, market forces certainly are not working. Many workers earn more than the minimum wage, but still 150,000 New Hampshire workers earn less than $15 an hour. That's about 20% of the workforce, or 1 in 5 workers. These workers are not earning enough to cover basic needs of housing, food, clothing, medical care, and transportation. They are eligible for public assistance programs. These safety net programs were designed to help people in temporary and unusually unfortunate circumstances, not as a way to make ends meet every month, month after month. These programs are paid for by taxpayers, like the workers who rely on them and like all of us here. And why are we subsidizing businesses so that they can increase their profits? Those I spoke with found these facts concerning, but countered with, well, if wages go up, then prices are going to go up and everybody's going to be hurt. Not so, according to the Economic Policy Institute. They estimate that raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour would lift wages for 32 million workers across the country at a cost of $108 billion, which is a huge sum, but it's less than 1%, it's 0.7% of the $16 trillion U.S. consumers spend annually. So even if the wage was made in 1 year, and most bills, including this one, propose incremental increases, the effect would raise prices only by less than 1%. Another common comment is that workers who want to improve their income can pursue education and training for better paying jobs. Many workers have done this, resulting in worker shortages on essential jobs, from highway workers to retail sales clerks to nursing assistants, from school bus drivers to substitute teachers and educational paraprofessionals. Many find the stress and the lack of support in these essential occupations, combined with low pay, to be demoralizing, stressful, and a toll on one's physical and mental health, as they constantly worry to make ends meet. The National Employment Law Project and the Economic Policy Institute found that wages were below the cost of living in New Hampshire for the following occupations: waitstaff, fast food cooks and workers, dishwashers, cashiers, substitute teachers, restaurant hostesses, laundry workers, childcare workers, retail salespersons, housekeeping cleaners, home health care aides, nursing assistants, teaching assistants, and in most counties, paramedics. We need these people for our society to function, and if we deem that they are essential, shouldn't we respect them with a decent wage? Inflation is a big concern now, and we can all talk about how increases in the price of food, electricity, fuel, and other items have wreaked havoc with our budgets. The people who are most affected are low-wage workers who spend all their income on essential items like food, housing, and energy. They could barely make ends meet in 2020 and use pandemic relief checks to cover basic expenses. Now they are stretched more, stressed, and suffering. They are relying even more on food pantries, church relief funds, and public assistance programs. As they spend almost all their income in local stores and businesses, they build and strengthen our state economy. They are also the ones most affected by higher prices because so many of them work in retail and service jobs. Consumers will cut back first on discretionary spending, such as eating out and buying extras, and low-wage workers in service and retail will be among the first to see their jobs cut and their hours cut. I would recommend that you consider amending this bill to include a cost of living adjustment each year. Even the significant increases included in this bill will still leave workers earning less than the living wage. The MIT Living Wage Calculator shows that a living wage for a single person in New Hampshire is over $17 an hour, and more if one is supporting a dependent. Annual cost of living adjustments would prevent workers from falling further behind and would allow their wages to maintain their buying power. If we believe that everyone should be able to stand up on their own 2 feet, then we should support paying workers enough so that they can do that. I thank the sponsors of this bill for recognizing this. This bill is a conservative move in the right direction. Please support SB 144 as ought to pass, to reinstate the minimum wage in New Hampshire and raise it to $15 an hour by 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on Senate Bill 144? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 144.
We'll take a 10-minute break and I'll talk to Donna.
10-minute recess.
Here's
the sheets.
See if there's any easy. Keep the cup. Go back internal market. Okay.